She spent that night behind a closed convenience store, curled beneath cardboard boxes, teeth chattering in silence. The dollar was gone, but the warmth of what she'd done lingered, briefly. In the morning, she woke to hunger and rejection. The job interview she'd hoped for, canceled. The shelter she tried to enter, full. Still, she moved forward. Always forward. Every time life knocked her down, she remembered his face, the disbelief in his eyes, the way he clutched the dollar, like it was gold. It reminded her that even in suffering, she could give. She worked odd jobs for coins, washing windows, scrubbing diner bathrooms, collecting cans. No complaints. She'd survived worse. What she lacked in comfort, she carried in heart. But the world rarely noticed people like her. She saw the way people avoided her eyes, like her struggle was contagious. And every time she told herself, I am more than my pain. One freezing night, she collapsed outside a bakery. The owner, an old woman, took her in, gave her a hot drink, a job sweeping floors, a room in the attic, just enough to start over. Years passed. She rose slowly, day by day, from sweeping to cashier, from living in the attic to renting a tiny studio. She never had much, but it was hers. Every inch earned with grit. And still, she thought of the man. Wondered if he made it, if he survived, if her small gesture had ever mattered. Then came the day everything changed. A black car pulled up outside the bakery. A man stepped out, dressed in tailored clothes, confidence in his walk, but there was something familiar in his eyes. He entered the shop, scanning the room. When he saw her, his face lit up, and time seemed to freeze. I've been looking for you, he said, voice soft. For 5 years. She stared, confused, cautious. Do I know you? He smiled. You gave me your last dollar, outside that gas station, in the rain. You told me not to give up. Her heart stopped. That was you. The rain fell like punishment from the sky, soaking through her thin coat, turning every step heavier than the last. Her stomach ached with hunger, her hands stiff with cold. All she had was a crumpled $1 bill. She stared at that dollar, as if it could bring her back to life. It wasn't enough for a meal, barely enough for a coffee, but it was all she had left in this world. She gripped it tightly like it held her dignity. Under the neon light of a flickering gas station sign, she curled her fingers around her last bit of hope. People walked past, indifferent, as if she were just part of the sidewalk. And then, he appeared. He looked worse than she did. Wet clothes, bare feet, bloodshot eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and broken dreams. But he didn't ask for anything. He just stood there, next to the trash, like he belonged to it. She noticed him shiver, hugging his arms around himself, his head bowed low. She didn't know his story, but she could feel it like a weight in the air. The world had forgotten him too. Without a word, she walked up and placed the dollar in his hand. He looked up, startled, as if she'd given him a treasure. Why? He whispered, his voice barely human. Because I know what it's like to feel invisible, she said. And I hope one day someone sees you. He tried to speak, but his throat closed up. She gave him a weak smile and turned away, not expecting gratitude, not expecting anything. That night, she slept under cardboard, stomach empty, but soul oddly full. Weeks passed. She wandered from corner to corner, chasing scraps of food, hope, and warmth. Some nights, she questioned why she'd given that dollar. Other nights, she remembered his eyes and felt proud. Then came the bakery. The old woman who ran it caught her wiping the sidewalk for coins. She didn't chase her off. Instead, she offered coffee, then bread, then carefully, a job, cleaning tables after hours. She swept floors, washed pans, and learned to breathe again. The attic above the bakery became her first real roof in years, a space with warmth, silence, and safety. Slowly, she began to rebuild. Each day was a new test. Some nights, she cried herself to sleep from exhaustion. Other nights, she dreamed of a life where no one had to choose between kindness and survival. But she kept going. She earned enough to buy new shoes, then a coat, a savings jar, a used phone. One day, she looked into a mirror and didn't flinch. She was still here, still standing. But she never forgot that man, the one who didn't ask for help, the one who looked like he'd been erased by the world. She often wondered if her small gesture had mattered, if he ever made it, and then everything changed. A sleek black car pulled up to the bakery. A man in a navy suit stepped out, clean-shaven, confident. But when their eyes met, her breath caught in her throat. His face was older, but she knew it instantly. He walked in straight to the counter. "I've been looking for you," he said. "For 5 years," she stared, speechless. I think I remember you," she said slowly. "Outside that gas station." "You gave me your last dollar," he said softly. "And you told me not to give up. I never forgot that." Her knees almost gave out. He told her everything, how he used that dollar to buy a sandwich, how that sandwich gave him the energy to walk into a shelter, how he got clean, took jobs, went back to school, changed his life. "You saved me," he said, eyes filled with tears. "That moment changed everything." She laughed, broken and full. "I didn't have anything to give." "You had everything to give," he said. "You gave me hope when I didn't think I deserved any." Then he pulled an envelope from his coat and handed it to her. Inside was a check, enough to buy a home, enough to build a new life, enough to erase every debt and every doubt. Her hands trembled. "Why would you do this?" "Because you saved me," he said. "And I wanted to help you finally live the life you deserve." Tears streamed down her face, not because of the money, but because someone had remembered her humanity and reflected it back. Today she owns the bakery. She named it the Last Dollar Cafe, a place where anyone can sit, rest, and feel seen. Every table tells a story, every loaf is served with a side of compassion, and on the wall behind the counter, framed in glass, hangs a single worn-out dollar bill. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "Kindness is never wasted." Sometimes it circles back when you least expect it and changes your life forever. That night, after receiving the check, she sat alone in her small attic room, the paper still trembling in her hands. It wasn't just money. It was a mirror. It showed her the weight of what she'd done long ago. She had always thought that dollar was the last piece of her survival. But now, looking back, she realized it was the first piece of someone else's redemption. Her brokenness had planted hope in another. She used to believe she was invisible, that no one saw her pain, her hunger, her effort. But this moment proved something bigger. What we do, even when no one watches, still matters. She thought of all the days she'd gone unnoticed, all the times she felt forgotten. But now, one act of kindness, done when she had nothing, had returned to her in a way no one could predict. That awakening shook her, not just because it changed her life, but because it validated her soul. Her kindness had not only survived, it had grown inside someone else and come back tenfold. She cried not from relief, but from the truth. We are never too poor to give. Even the smallest compassion plants a seed, and sometimes that seed grows into someone's salvation. She remembered the man's face the night she gave him the dollar. The lifeless eyes, the shivering hands. And now, he was a changed man, not because of what she gave, but because she gave at all. In that, she saw something divine. That maybe life wasn't about having more, but about giving when you have less. That kindness offered from struggle is the most honest kindness of all. That night she couldn't sleep, not from fear but from clarity, because she had thought she was broken, irrelevant, discarded. But now, she saw the truth. Her heart had never stopped beating for others. And that was her wealth all along. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of the check she'd received never left her. It wasn't the money that haunted her thoughts, but the realization of how far a small act of kindness could reach. She often found herself staring at that check, her fingers brushing its corners as if it could somehow tell her what to do next. She returned to the bakery the morning after, but the air felt heavier, charged with the intensity of everything that had happened. The ovens hummed. The scent of fresh bread filled the air. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside her, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. Then, one morning, a familiar face appeared in the bakery door. It was a woman, about her age, eyes tired but determined, clutching her jacket close as if trying to protect herself from a storm. She hesitated, looking at the bakery's warmth like it was the first light she'd seen in days. The woman stood there, unsure, staring at the menu board, her body language screaming lonely and lost. The cafe was empty that morning, and without thinking, she walked over. Something about this woman's gaze, so full of unspoken words, reminded her of herself, of the days when she'd been on the outside, watching the world go by, hoping someone would see her. "Can I help you?" she asked gently, voice soft but firm. The woman looked up, startled, like she hadn't expected someone to speak to her. Her lips trembled as she opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Take a seat," she said, nodding toward an empty table. "I'll bring you something warm." The woman sank into the chair like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She didn't know what made her do it. Maybe it was the instinct to give, to pay forward what had been given to her, but she couldn't just stand by. This woman needed more than a cup of coffee. She needed to feel seen. As she returned to the counter, the woman finally spoke. "I've been out there for so long. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore." Her voice cracked, the pain deep in each word. She paused, the cup of coffee in her hand suddenly feeling too small for the moment. "You're here," she said, her voice steady. "And that's enough. You're not invisible. Not here, not ever." She placed the coffee in front of her, letting the warmth radiate between them. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of pity. No, they were something different. A soft recognition of the kindness, the humanity that had been given to her without judgment, without expectation. For the first time in a long time, the woman looked like she was breathing again, like she was finally seen. It wasn't a grand gesture. No one else in the cafe would ever know, but it felt like the most important thing she'd done in her entire life. To offer someone the simple gift of feeling alive in a world that so often told people like them they didn't matter. The woman didn't speak much after that. She drank her coffee slowly, as if each sip was a reclaiming of the pieces of herself she'd lost. When she stood to leave, she met her eyes and said, "Thank you. I needed this more than you know." And in that moment, she realized something profound. Giving had never been about the dollar. It had never been about what she had to offer. It had always been about what others needed to see in themselves when someone took a moment to offer their heart. The woman walked out into the cold, but she wasn't walking the same way she had come in. Something had shifted in her, and for the first time in years, she had the courage to step forward. And for her, that was everything. She stood by the counter, watching her leave, the weight of the world suddenly lighter on her shoulders. That single moment, that one conversation, had cracked open the door to something much bigger than any of them knew. This place, this cafe, wasn't just a business. It was a sanctuary, a reminder that no one had to be alone. One late afternoon, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a young man entered the cafe, his eyes scanning the room quickly. He looked anxious, like he was waiting for something to happen. Without thinking, she watched him more closely, her instincts kicking in. There was something about him that felt off, like he was on the edge of a decision that could change everything. He came up to the counter, his voice low, almost nervous. "I'm just looking for a place to sit, just a place to breathe." Her eyes narrowed slightly. There was something in his tone that made her heart race, an unfamiliar tension in the air. She knew what it was like to sit alone in a place like this, to feel like the world was too loud and too cruel. But there was something more. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Take a seat," she said softly, her voice calm, but there was a firmness behind it that wasn't there before. "I'll bring you something warm." She watched him move to a corner table, sitting with his back to the wall, eyes constantly scanning the room. It was a quiet night, but she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not in the cafe, but in him. Something was off. Her mind raced back to that woman from earlier, the one who had come in so broken, so lost. She couldn't let anyone go through that feeling again, not if she could help it. This cafe, this safe space, was hers to protect. No one would come here and leave without knowing they were valued, that they mattered. She moved toward him, her steps determined. The warmth of the kitchen behind her seemed to fortify her. She wasn't just a woman running a cafe anymore. She was someone who had the power to make a difference, to stop people from vanishing into the shadows. When she reached his table, she paused, taking a deep breath. "I know it's hard," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "But you're not alone here. You're not invisible." He flinched, as if the words struck too close to something he didn't want to confront. But then, slowly, he looked up at her, his eyes wide with something that might have been fear. Or maybe it was something deeper, a fear of being seen for who he really was. "I'm not sure I belong here," he muttered, his voice tight, almost pleading. "I don't think anyone's ever really seen me." She shook her head, her jaw tightening with determination. "You belong here, just like everyone else." She leaned in slightly, her tone soft but unwavering. "No one is too broken to start again." He stared at her, and for a moment it was as if the room held its breath. She didn't know if he'd believe her. She didn't know if he would let down his guard. But she did know one thing for certain. She wasn't giving up on him. As she turned to walk away, she glanced back at him one last time. He had stopped tapping his fingers, and his shoulders were no longer hunched. There was a hint of something softer in his eyes, a glimmer of hope, if only faint. And that was all she needed. That was why she kept fighting for this place, because when you saw someone, really saw them, you gave them the chance to breathe again. She stood behind the counter, her gaze fixed on the door. For a moment, she wasn't just a woman running a cafe. She was the protector of all the broken souls who walked through it, and no one was going to slip through the cracks again. Years passed, and the cafe became a symbol of second chances. She had never imagined that the simple act of giving her last dollar would lead to something so transformative. Each day, more people came through the door, broken, lost, but hopeful. She wasn't just a cafe owner anymore. She was a beacon for those who needed to find their way back to themselves. The walls of her business were filled with stories, with faces of people who had been saved by kindness, just as she had been. And one day, standing at the counter, she watched as a woman, young and nervous, much like she once was, sat down and ordered a cup of coffee. She felt a warmth wash over her, a peaceful knowing that no matter how far we fall, there's always someone willing to lift us up. Her heart swelled with gratitude. She had found her purpose, not in the money or the business, but in the human connections, the shared moments that proved we were never truly alone. As she looked around the cafe, she realized the greatest thing she had built wasn't the walls or the profits. It was the hope. Hope that no matter how hard life gets, there's always someone who sees you, always someone who will reach out. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly at peace, knowing that the kindness she gave had come full circle, changing lives, including her own.